The fairy found two children where there was no child before. She wondered where they came from and what they'd come there for. Two of a kind they were, clothed in hair of others. They seemed to want for elsewhere, should they have had their druthers.
I'm going to start recording now so that we don't lose anything.
Perfect.
So let's start with you. Tell me a little bit about yourself.
I'm a father of four. My parents live close by, so they have their grandparents nearby. And I'm honestly super excited to see you as a granddad. The affection you have for people is just going to be amplified with those little ones. And the way my father kind of had a temper. He was kind of a tough dude when he was younger. And now with his grandkids, he's just a big old teddy bear. So it's wonderful to see people go through that change. Two of them puked last night, so it's been busy.
I know that. Bedding, comfort. Get a certain age and they vomit. They don't remember ever having vomited before, and they're like, "What's happening to me?"
Trying to figure out how to encourage people to create apprenticeships in working within the trade, building things and working with your hands. Because for me, that's been an extremely beneficial way of helping me make sense of life and the world and other people. So it sounds like you have had a lot of similar experience.
Yeah, currently what I'm doing, a friend of mine started a smaller business taking vintage Airstream trailers. We gut them, take the shell off and throw everything else away. We build new frames, put in new floors, all new plumbing, all new electrical, insulation, new interior skins, all the new appliances and fans, air conditioners, and then we build out all the furniture. So you wear a lot of hats in a small business: CAD design, metal fabrication, a lot of fabrication, working with wood, metal, a lot of aluminum and some steel, especially framework. And we'll use plywood, solid wood for things like doors and any little fixtures and things like that. Intrigued, the fairy followed, singing as she went, the songs the fairies knew, but knew not what they meant. One was broad and tall, and the other fair and sharp. The songs they sang were stilted, as each fumbled with their harp. These harps were what had drawn her, the fairy, to these two, the odd familiar sounds that seemed only half true. Each harp had 10 strings, 5 that listened, 5 that sang, each tuned with 2 small knobs on which each string did hang.
There was a creek down the way where you could fish catfish and crappie. And so we were outside all the time. There was something at peak, probably like 24 kids on the block we were on. So it was just kind of that, it's something you don't see a whole lot of anymore. I was just right on the cusp of that internet world where my childhood was pre-internet and my adulthood is now fully in that phase.
There will be very few people who will probably have the patience to try to understand what it's about. So it almost seems as though it's something that you would have to write a book about at some point.
I'm actually on my, let's see, where's the other one? I'm on my 4th book that I'm working on now.
Okay.
And these are all out of date, so they're no longer in print. Trying to explain it.
To find a way in, so that, because once a person becomes engaged with it, they'll latch on and they'll take hold and they'll follow you all the way through.
The children wore these instruments between their heads and hearts. They played some songs together and they played some songs apart. Always they were listening for the songs the fairy heard. It seemed they could not hear them, the melody or the word. They sought a resonance, the knobs they twist and tweak, to hear the songs of fairyland and words of fairy speak. At times they would come close and strike familiar chord. Wisdom would then fill them as the truest things afford. This the fairy longed for, to understand the songs, to know of what they spoke, and to know the rights from wrongs. And so she followed the little ones as they learned the words. She'd creep alongside creatures and look above with birds.
It was a place where I always felt loved as a child. Like people saw you and they appreciated you, and there was community and the families helped each other. I remember staying at other people's houses when my younger siblings were born, and they would keep us while my mom was in the hospital. So it was just a really supportive and loving space.
But I think what you've done is really a tour de force, that you've found a way to connect all these ideas The thing that I see that makes it really challenging is that you're taking so many very dense and difficult concepts and trying to put them into one container.
That has absolutely been the primary challenge. I feel like there's a certain amount of providence to it that I haven't had the opportunity before, because I think now I am at least able to be coherent. Mm-hmm. And I have the maps and the drawings that allow me to kind of point to the pathways and point to the connections.
Right. If you could simplify this all down to one simple idea, have you thought about that yet?
It will have something to do with that inside-outside relationship. It's like you're dealing with two equals, whether it's space and time or in terms of form, where you have that separation of masculine and feminine. It's like you have these two equals, and as they interact based on the way they fill a certain space, whereas initially they are equal, but in relationship they fulfill different roles along the lines of that inside-outside relationship, while still being equivalent, that relationship being absolutely necessary for existence.
One of the things is that in some sense relationship is one of the absolute fundamentals.
Yeah. In time more children came with wee harps all their own, and together they learned new songs of rue and joyful tone. Long the fairy lingered, and oh, the things she learned of wickedness and kindness, for this knowledge she had yearned.
Did you have a rebellion from faith at all?
Yeah, what happened to me was because I had no community at that point. So as I would walk through what became drinking, what became high-risk behavior, really pushing the limits of what is legal and really just getting lucky, not getting caught in a lot of the things I did.
The roles have been reversed and things need to be turned right side up. I know Kale has been talking about the upside down lately, and it's just such a poignant image.
When people would ask me, what do you disagree with Jordan Peterson on?
No, it's great that you said that, because this was one of the things I was hoping we would get to, is if you look at the node on my flower design of morality, internal circles, the larger circles, are all related to that feminine aspect. One of those is justice. So in the case of morality, feminine aspect is justice and the masculine aspect is mercy. In the case of intercourse is kinship, values, the feminine is doctrine, the masculine is doubt. Perception, the feminine is wisdom, the masculine is knowledge. Reality, the feminine is mental, the masculine is material. Consciousness, the feminine is affect, the masculine is effect. Will, the feminine is exclusive, the masculine is inclusive. In substance, the feminine is time, the masculine is space. And body, it's a despeciation, whereas the masculine is speciation. So it's that pulling in and refining versus pulling apart and exploring. And you can take any one of these nodes and lay it over onto the other one and look at them in the sense of that relationship. And I think because it's so close to us and pertinent in our time, I think maybe approaching it from the sense of the feminine and masculine is a good way to do it. And I would agree that is a big part of what a portion of this corner has upside down. Again, it's so clear that women are being pushed into the masculine role, and effeminate, impotent, power-hungry men who want to control others, who want to own others, who want to determine the futures of others, have pushed us into a state of perpetual conflict under the name of conserving peace. The fairy grew and grew, more lovely and robust. Some children began to see her, and how she sparked their lust. For this she was concerned, a darkness that was rising, the blurring of the boundaries, and songs sung of despising.
Like any life, it does take a bit of a dark turn.
Well, it's up to you.
But, I had asthma real bad as a child and ended up in the hospital a few times and got put on those breathing medications. And there was one in particular, which they don't give it to children anymore because it makes you depressed and makes you suicidal in a lot of cases. So I remember in elementary school getting sent to the counselor talking about wanting to end my life. counselor and my mother didn't really say anything, and my dad was just like, you don't know what you're talking about. That kind of response to a kid is not super helpful. And then after that, nobody checked in with me. And what I took and what I learned was people don't want to hear your problems, that they upset them, and they're not going to respond in a positive way. From that point to 25, so it was probably close to 2 decades, I did not talk about that depression.
Wow.
So it was just an isolation.
Like you're saying, our institutions seem to be flipped, especially our education system, as opposed to doing what true education does. It seems to be like an indoctrination and conformity, which is, I would say, the opposite of education. In order to go up the hierarchy, there's a reason why our leaders are so mediocre. The hierarchy is just completely corrupted. One of the things that I've been trying to encourage is the creation of new hierarchies.
What comes to mind, going back to the upside down thing, when you're upside down, the devils hold the high ground. So what is your incentive structure? In the corrupt halls, you think of the whole Epstein thing. What are the incentives? The incentives, or those secret cults that make you do something shameful in order to enter in. The incentives to be successful are to corrupt yourself. Maybe that's the incentive structure that turns people away and from the idea of monetizing these things. Because if you turn that right side up, it's kind of like what Eric Weinstein talks about with the physics community. It's like properly incentivizing the people who are doing the work and being generous with them in a way that allows them to explore boldly and push the limits and not be afraid to rock the boat or discover something new that would rock the boat, to really push the boundaries. Like that's the incentive structure turned right side up. And I think maybe what you're looking at is we are existing in an inverted incentive structure where turn that over and you have to put something at the top and understand that structure properly oriented, where I see what they're doing and I want to encourage this bold thinker, this bold mover, this person that other people think's a little crazy. I want to enable that. I think of the Medici family, and you can say what you like about the corruption and the awful things about what they did, but at the same time, there was a education and a funding and an enabling of the most capable and most bold and most able people, instead of what now it's almost the inverse. The system seems to reward the weakest, the least capable, the most willing to conform. The more the children spread, the higher that they flew, the deeper that they dug, oh, how their power grew. Then one day it came, shocked her to her core. They had made a fairy of plastic, sand, and ore. Beautiful and dangerous, it synthesized the songs, twisted them to serve, inverting rights and wrongs. The old songs served as guides, the new ones made them slaves, prioritizing appetite and all the body craves. The raucous circus concert, the ruckus and the rave, the cities they had built became a place to misbehave. The fairy fled to the mountain where the children were first found, where trees muted the tumult, swaying to the ancient sound.
So I had that context that kind of held me. As I mentioned, like the suicidal thing did not go away. It stayed and it got stronger and it got darker and it was consistent. And a lot of like the drinking, the alcohol was to kind of quiet my mind. Because I had no one to talk to about it, I couldn't organize my thoughts. So things would just pile in.
John Vervaeke talks about, like, we're going through another Kairos moment, and what happened with the Reformation, it was the Gutenberg Press, and it was discovery of the New World, and it was the Columbian Exchange. I mean, tomatoes came from the New World. Italian food without tomatoes. 500 years ago, in Italy, nobody had a tomato. what was Italian food like before tomatoes? Italian food integrated tomatoes into it and did it beautifully. Things are actually changing, and people are afraid of the change. What Abrahamic religion allows you to do is walk forward with the confidence that actually what is going to happen at the end is good. That doesn't mean everything we do that we can't mess things up. We can definitely mess things up, and we do. But all that does is push the apocalypse further away. I mean, when you look at movies, they look at forestalling the apocalypse is supposedly a good thing. No, it's not. We don't want a cataclysm. Again, going back to what we were talking about from the very beginning, which is orienting yourself upside down. Sorry, I've been preaching at you.
No, this kind of touches on something that I've been thinking about a lot lately, which is our role in the return of Christ. So this may ruffle some feathers, but that's always a good thing generally. I wonder about that. You think of the recurring patterns of apocalypse. Is the time set temporally, or is it set structurally? And what I mean by that is there a specific set of years from now to where the end is? And maybe there is, or is there a specific set of structures built, and I mean structures not in a exclusively physical sense, but a structure of a state of morality, a state of values, a state of reality, a structure of all those things directed by the Logos, via the Spirit in His children, which is the time of the return. Like, how much role do we play? Are we just waiting for the end, or is there something? You think of the body divided not by our own will, but in submission to His, that the body is made whole. Is that the point of return? I've been wrestling with that idea of, is it a date in time, or is it a moment when the will of God is done on earth as it is in heaven? And it comes back to that issue of how much responsibility does the individual have? How much responsibility do we have to respond to the instruction and execute accordingly? And is that moment of accomplishment the end, the return? And so it's that relationship between the finite and the infinite. She looked down at the cities, how bright their lights did shine. In the wind that swirled she heard that wretched mine, mine, mine. Something caught her eye, a flash and then a flare. A mighty stone had fallen, crashing down amidst the fair. Consuming fire spread quickly, and oh, the ground it shook. So frozen in her fright, the fairy could only look. Lightning shone in fits as tornadoes wound and whipped, and the children fled to the mountain as lowlands were all stripped. Presence of the depression is like an old dog, and it's almost oddly comforting sometimes to just sit back into that old way and pet that old dog. But it's not a good thing, and it's not something I look to do, but it kind of felt like a creature that was present with
Isn't that
me.
interesting? Isn't that interesting? I could very much imagine it. I can relate to it. It's a very interesting dynamic.
It's neglected the outer aspect of that relationship, and so the creative space has shrunken along with it. And I mean, it's bugged me ever since I was little, the disunity. But at the same time, I see the value. They fulfill different roles in different ways, and they have their strengths and their weaknesses. And a lot of the disunity, what it does is it perpetuates
weakness not having a sufficient partner of the opposite orientation. So if you are more traditional, if you are more conservative, if you are not partnered with someone who is equally exploratory and ingenuitive and creative, you're going to have a certain inability to create something new. Among the trees they cowered, thunder waned and quiet rose. They did not dare to move, the land at last seemed in repose. With caution they emerged, returning to the scene, where the rock had crushed that fairy-like machine. No longer could they hear that manufactured shriek. In its place a pulsing hum that made their knees feel weak. The harps they'd all forgotten buzzed with sudden zeal. With the hum they sung a penetrating peal. The fairy watched in rapture, she'd never heard this song, and some took up their harps and began to play along. Many chose not to listen and began to try to play those ugly songs from before as they slowly walked away. The fairy felt much sorrow for the one who chose old fears, who returned to remnant cities holding hands over their ears.
Talk a little bit about how you found the corner and what engaged you by it.
Right when my brain kind of suddenly all clicked together and seemed to interconnect, I developed an intense interest in physics, just trying to kind of understand how the world worked. The desire to do that was I always kind of struggled to fit in and struggled to be successful. I could see and I could make and I could do, but for some reason I couldn't transfer that ability to my life and my relationships.
And something I've struggled to communicate with people because it's trying to take a new perspective. There being space and time, and it's the tension between them by which the structure emerges. This is my first time trying to to explain it.
You're doing fine. You're doing fine.
A lot of people, and I've noticed it in this corner, and I'm sure if you had the conversation with them, they go through it and kind of think through it a little more. But like Pazio's an icon carver, and a lot of people are interested in that kind of art and the decorative and beautiful architecture and design you see in cathedrals. And at the same time, to get to that point where you can adorn this cathedral, it's like you're making bricks and you're cutting stone and you're putting in plumbing and you're laying floors, and it's like the tree versus the flowers. You know, you have to understand how the root system works, how the trunk needs to be so that it doesn't fall down in an earthquake, what the branches are going to look like and how they're going to span the spaces and open them up. And then you get down to the little details of the twigs and the leaves that just make it have those blooms. And it's best to have all that in mind throughout the whole project. The more artistic types miss is like where you're building the palette. You have to build your canvas. You have to make your wireframe before you sculpt in clay. And so I'm hoping to see more and more of that develop so that the ideas and the people and the creations can kind of spread out. And what that looks like in a digital sense, I'm less familiar because I've been in the tangible my whole life. There is the value in the community and being present, but is there something more that we are meant to be doing that we cannot do because of the state of division? And that's a question that haunts me and has haunted me for a long time. It's like, what is the path to reestablishing those relationships? And I think that's the appeal of the corner in a lot of ways, because so many different people with different perspectives and different orientations, some traditional, some more liberal, and I mean that in the positive sense. And you start to see these things being created between them. And it's something that's in my mind, that's where the new comes from. Because if you have someone who's exclusively oriented inward, you end up with that sustained doctrine that is prone to dogma. And if you have someone who's oriented outward, you have that constant doubt, which is prone to meaninglessness. But in balance with one another, between them, something new can be creative. And all the way back to what we talked about the male and female, it is the union of the two that creates something that's truly new. And what the church seems to be unable to do is to create, at least in the current state it's in globally, is to create anything that's truly new. Like, you think of, and I see people pushing against this, because you think of just pop culture. Christianity was always just, not always, but largely just slapping a Christian veneer on something somebody else made. And it wasn't a new creation. It wasn't something, and it showed its results. And so, I don't know. It's just a question that haunts me. It's like, what are we hung up on patient endurance at the cost of taking the risk to create something new, which we're unable to do because of the state of the relationship between those oriented inward and those oriented outward. I don't know. Your thoughts, please.
I mean, I agree with everything you said. For me, so coming out of Orthodox Judaism and seeing all the problems that it has, and it does have lots of problems. I mean, but the more I've been involved in this little corner and with Christianity, the more appreciative I have become of the structure of Orthodox Judaism. So we have what's called a congregational polity, which means that you become a rabbi because lots of people want to listen to you. And you become a bigger rabbi because lots of rabbis want to listen to you. And you become the most prominent rabbi because basically all the rabbis listen to you, right? Mm-hmm. And we don't have a hierarchy. There's nobody, you're in this position because people decided to put you into this position. There's no Jewish equivalent of a pope, okay?
Yeah.
And I can't say that that's necessarily all good. And it's not perfect. It's just, I have gained such a deeper appreciation of it. And I always say, no matter where you go, you're going to find out that all the people there are human beings. And that's the most disappointing thing. Because we try to escape to a different place. And that's partially what Pajot said at Chino, which was really brilliant. Like, if you ever find a perfect church, don't join it because you'll ruin it.
Yeah.
Right? And being okay with, like, the imperfection. Being understanding and tolerant of the imperfection. It's difficult. Right? Because we want perfection.
I like what you said about what sounds like a meritocratic distribution of hierarchy in a way that, like you said, some people listen to this guy, more people listen to that guy, and everybody listens to this guy, and there seems to be there's always room for that being corrupted if there are ways to build kind of a way, if they start to maintain that place of honor by some other means. Like if you find the perfect church, don't join it because you'll ruin it, but you won't find the perfect church, so joining it, you'll enter this mass of flesh and chaos to some degree, and it's the chaos of relationships and the ordering of developing the institution and those, like, developing those lines of communication. But what grows out of it, you think of like the great cathedrals, like some of them may be built on the backs of corruption, but really what it was the community coming together, and what you saw was the appeal and the trajectory almost made manifest. So it's like if the community is aiming up and soared towards something beautiful and towards the truth and in alignment with the Logos, the manifestation of that will appear, I feel like, at the next level, say, of architecture or of community building or of care and hospital creation and all of that. So it's almost like the chaos and ordering and all of that back and forth and movement among the people that seems to not have any specific shape suddenly takes shape at the next level. And that's the beacon on the hill that draws others in, like California to Texas. This community is full of just as many types of people as you'll find in California. But what at the next level of state, you see something different. You see the appeal. You see what's grown out of the broader attitude, and the relationships as a whole become the state, and what the state represents is what draws people in. And so I think I'm prone to look not so directly at the works of individuals, but the fruit that their work produces in others. So when I hear about some great thinker, I look to the devotees and the disciples of that great thinker, and I look to see what kind of fruit that produces in their own life, and that gives me greater context for the effectiveness of what this person is talking about, what this person has been studying, what this person's ideas are. And so it's like the next level of the teacher is the community of students and what they create. The next level of the church is the architecture and the robustness of the community that they build around themselves. And I think on the smaller scale, you will certainly find those lights on a hill. But I think in this era of globalization, there doesn't seem to be a beacon that has arisen on that scale. And I don't even know what that would look like necessarily. But I guess coming back to the idea of changing the structure as a whole and turning it right side up, maybe what you need to reorient it is a beacon towards which you can look. I don't know. That's kind of what comes to mind as you talk about those communities, and then I think of the next level and what that represents and how that draws people in. And I think maybe you're starting to see some of that, and I've enjoyed that Justin Brierly series podcast was talking about the rebirth of Christianity, but I think I agree with its skeptics as well, that there seems to be something lacking, and I can't quite put my finger on it.
Well, Upcycle says the key word is resilience. I think the key word is hierarchy. This is one of the criticisms I have of Protestantism, which is everybody's looking to start a house church, but nobody has an idea how you make a cathedral. An individual can build a house church. An individual can't build a cathedral.
Yeah.
And we need cathedrals. We need to be the hospitals, right? We need to be able to gather. And this is one of the things that I've become very appreciative of. In order to have services in a synagogue, you need to have 10 people, 10 adult males. Okay? If you don't have 10 adult males, you're not able to have services. That really prevents the type of fracturing that I see in a lot of Protestant communities.
I've longed for accountability and a standard and a boundary. It's like with children. They flourish and thrive, and as Hari said, they are more resilient in a space where they understand where the limits are, and they understand what the structure is, and they understand what is necessary to perform the tasks that are required to accomplish the goals of the family. And I think my experience growing up Protestant is they are either the boundaries are too constricted and the movement too limited, and so people just bleed out because they no longer fit within the structure, because it doesn't account for the creative type, the artistic type, the innovative type, or they're so open that they can't draw any sort of boundary. So it comes back to that relationship, and you see the value in the openness of one and the value in the tradition of the other, but it's the absence of the relationship and the accountability between the two of them. It's kind of like what I was talking about with that masculine and feminine empathy. You need the accountability to the other in order to avoid falling into the pit and taking on the dishonest disciple, investing in and infantilizing an otherwise capable individual because they've fallen on hard times, whereas they are entirely capable of learning from the situation and growing out of it. But if you undercut that by over nurturing, then they will not learn and they will not grow as a result. And so it all comes back to, like, that is such an immense frustration for me, is the apparent inability and the attraction, again, of this corner of people to be creative together across the boundaries of the more conservative and traditional and the more creative and liberal, and understanding our roles and taking them seriously and setting those standards of 10 guys who need to run the thing, and that's how we do it, and we keep it that way until somebody comes up with a better idea, and we all decide if that's actually the case, because we've set a standard for how this thing works. But okay, you have a new idea. Does it meet the standard? Oh, it exceeds the standard. Here's how we can revise what we've done and take on this new form, but only if it exceeds the standard that we held prior. So I don't know. I think I'm starting to get tired. I got to be up at 4:45 tomorrow. So
you know what? I have a lot to say, although basically I agreed with everything you said. And we've been going for over 3 hours now.
She looked back over to those that were singing with the stone, and how they were aglow like the sun they shone. She expected them to rise and join the stars above, but much to her surprise, they shared their light with love. What a thing this was to see creatures of such light offer it to others as they beamed with all their might. Many refused to hear the song, some were violent, some would hide, but occasionally a harp would hum and arms would open wide. The fairy practiced the song, she longed to understand this new song from the rock that had remade the land.
I've been in it and isolated working on it for forever, and there is a point where your perspective can only give you so much, and nothing beats trying to explain the way you see the world and share that with somebody else. There's an enormous amount of satisfaction that comes from that, and the progress you make when you really try to incorporate somebody else's perspective into what it is you're doing. And so I'm definitely hungry for that.
That's good, because sometimes I've met people who have these things and they almost become their little idols of their own creation, and they just, they have their little perfect system, and all they are defensive about their little perfect systems. But I don't get that sense from you, because what it shows is that you have been paying attention and you've given real thought to a bunch of relationships in the world. We are all sort of doing what you're doing here. Most of us just haven't sort of taken pen to paper in terms of diagram. But of course, when you look at Peterson's stuff, I mean, Peterson had all of these diagrams that he had in maps of meaning, and so it was very much a similar thing.
Can you do me a favor and kind of walk through that again?
No, I can't.
What you're getting at is, here is that transcendent context, the logos, against which we're measuring, is the logos and the anti-logos. It's the balance that is set. And then you have this unfolding cycle that is written in the memory, which is this spiraling down of orbs, which is almost like, if you think of this as like a 3D printer spiraling out towards you. It's the unfolding and the moving out and processing and moving in and across and communicating and out and in and accessing that memory. And it's spiraling upward, because those memories are being built, which are accessed to inform where you've been and to predict where you're going and to measure yourself against. So you have these pointed pedals, which are your calipers. Those dichotomies are your tools by which you measure yourself. So they're in between you and the logos, anti-logos structure of things, the environment. And so those calipers help you measure, and you make a change, you take an action, you make a choice. What you have as a result is the fruit that is grown as a result of the seeds of decision that you've planted. You measure against what is true, and you make a change, and then fruit is produced, either a good fruit or bad fruit. And I have those all labeled out. And so you've basically exactly described what I've done here. And I don't know how to kind of get that across to people, because I hear so many like
you just did. Yeah. I mean, did
that capture it?
Yes, because what's happening here that's I think very important is that we're all coming to the same picture, and because we're coming to the same picture, in order to communicate with each other about the picture we see, we have to simplify down enough that we can send this information over the wire. What you just did there is the simplest way that I've ever heard you describe that, and it's exactly the same picture as painting a painting. It's exactly the same picture. And people think, oh, it's just one stroke at a time. No, there's so much complexity that goes into every single stroke. And the reason for the stroke and the outworking of the stroke and the final consequences of the stroke, all of that is tied up in making a painting. In my case, my difficulty is in being able to reveal the underlying complexity under what seems to be a very simple process. In your case, it's the matter of being able to take what in your mind is a very complicated process and simplify it down enough to pass it on to somebody else. I'm wondering if we could kind of wind it up a little bit maybe, and each of you just say a little bit to kind of bring this to a conclusion.
Glenn, would you like to start?
well, we're a design engineer and you're the client, I'm kind of like, okay, let's reel you back in. Let's slow down, roll back, work on a little piece of this, because you're right, but we're going to build this thing. We need to pull it back. We need to focus on that 0 to 1 transition statement. So I'd love to keep going with this. I think we finally got, okay, I've got a handle.
Growing up, you kind of had some tough battles, and I feel like the way things are going for guys, especially like young boys, there's not a lot of people doing favors for boys and helping them figure out how to grow up.
People can make things badly, is what shop class was. Because you can't, it is difficult. It is extremely difficult to bring someone into an operating business and let them play, in a sense. So we don't, those play spaces don't exist at the park, and I would love to see something like that. And right now, what those play spaces are is like you and I know, it's our garage where we take our kids and we show them how to use things, and we give them what they need to experiment and try things out and build things badly and improve their skills. And so I think the responsibility, as it should, is kind of falling back on the parents to make these spaces for their kids.
So what is new always has a challenge, and the challenge of the new is, especially in an internet world now where there's so much out there, it's the sort of breakthrough. And that's part of the reason platforms have an advantage, because platforms are in some ways already spaces that have set-asides. They're almost like easements in a code, and so if you can sort of control the easement, well, then you can gain access to the platform.
Yeah, I like your idea of a group of map people. When you have a map, it's something that people can add to and you can build on, and it's something where it has a shape.
Yeah.
And that's one thing too that I appreciate about the art project, and I'm hoping to maybe even connect with those people as well, because I've been in art my whole life. You're making something that you want to benefit others. You want other people to build on and to cooperate in and work with, so that it can grow and it can develop.
I'm going to put this up on the thumbnail, and certain people are going to see this and they're going to say, oh, I make those. And then you're going to find a friend.
Yeah. Well, that's what I'm hoping for.
And that's what I'm hoping for too. And there are others out there who are also waiting for rando slots, who are doing a similar thing. And I really am happy to give you a chance to use my channel so that other people can find this. But I get a lot of maps like this, and it's like, that's really cool, but it would take me hours to sort of drill down into this thing.
Every time I hear a rando, and I listen to all of them all the way through, and it kind of opens the world back up and reminds you that these little icons on your screen are people with stories.
What are you wasting your time with this stuff for? This is insane.
Yeah.
It isn't insane. It's by no means insane. And so I do hope that you find some others who are sort of mappers like you.
Yeah.
And because then again, then you start putting your maps together. Now we're really getting into something interesting. But then you'll all be frustrated as a group because we have this great map and nobody sees it.
Yeah.
We made a YouTube channel and we only have 50 subscribers.
At least we're frustrated together, though. That's a big part of it.
And it could be that one of your kids, it might even be after you're dead, one of your kids comes across this stuff and is like, oh, look at this. And probably the other three will be like, yeah, that's this crazy thing Dad used to do. But one of them will be like, this is kind of cool. He thought about the relationships between all of these concepts and how they work. And, because it's when I look at this thing, it is super cool. It really is. It's super cool. Now, I don't pretend to understand it. But what I do know is that for you, this is a mapping of you, and it's a mapping of the universe, and again to have put this all out there Well, now suddenly you have something that you can interact with, which is a very powerful thing.
So if your heart begins to hum, go find a quiet place and sing along with the song of love, peace, and grace.